I was born February 16th, 1956. And you know what I always told my mother? That was the greatest day of your life. The day that I landed on the earth from the universe. Because all of us, we were just really trying to figure out where we were going to land. And so God decided that he wanted moi to be here to carry on my Uncle Jack Johnson's legacy and to preserve it. So now, I wanted to just say that I found out Jack Johnson was my uncle when I was 12 years old. I had seen him in school because during the 50s and 60s, black people were given Black History Week. We were relegated to a week. Then in 1976, they gave us a whole entire month. Isn't that amazing? Yes. Amazing. It's amazing. So when I found out that he was my uncle, I asked my mother. Her brother told me, actually, one of my uncles, his name was Uncle Sonny. And he said to me one day, I was 12, he said, did you know that you have an uncle who was the first black heavyweight champion of the world? And I said, what? I couldn't process that. What are you talking about? And I was living in a housing project. I talk about this all the time. I grew up in Robert Taylor homes. My Uncle Sonny said that to me, and I asked my mother. I said, well, where's he at? She said, well, he died in a car crash. I said, well, what happened to him before he died? She said he went to prison. And when she said that, I could see the pain in her eyes. And she was troubled that I asked her that. She said he went to prison. I said, for what? She said, the Mann Act. I said, what is that? She said, it's transporting white women across state lines for immoral purposes. Of course, I didn't know what immoral meant, but I figured it was something really funky. But then as I got older, I began to ask more questions. I began to read about him. But one of the first things I did, I went to the library because I was trying to find out more about who he was. So there was a book that was written, and I do believe it was the only book because it was in 1968. And the book was called Black Champion by this man named Phineas Farr. So I went to the library. You're supposed to check books out. I didn't check the book out. I put it under my arm and I walked out. In essence, I stole it. So anyway, I got the book, read it, couldn't really make too much out of it. But as I began to get older and older, I researched, I kept asking questions, I talked to other people in my family. And once I realized that he was fearless, he was bold, he was amazing, he was awesome, confident, proud, handsome. I have just been blown away. I've just been mesmerized. And let me tell you why. As a black man living in the time that he lived, because he was a heavyweight champion from 1908 to 1915, for him to live and to marry and openly date white women, something that got people killed. In fact, black people were being killed just for being black. That's a historical fact. But he was able to disregard what society thought of him and do very much as he pleased. And he didn't care what people thought or how he was perceived. This is how he lived his life. I grew up hearing stories about how he took care of his family, how he would pay the rent, buy clothes, buy food, how he would always send money because he was closest to his sister Janie, my great-grandmother. And he would always send money or whatever it was that they needed. And I'll tell you something else. In the midst of him being persecuted and chased by the federal government and the authorities, he said that they would knock on his door, they would wait for him, they would call his house and just they just hounded him relentlessly. And my mother told me a story that her grandmother told her, his sister. They were all at his mother's house because he had bought her a mansion. They were all at her house, and they were sitting in the kitchen table. His sister Lucy, Fanny, Janie, they were all sitting, and he began talking about going to prison, and he didn't understand why they were prosecuting him. And he burst into tears. He just dropped his head and cried inconsolably, and that bothered me when I heard that. A man so great and so powerful and so revered to be broken down like that. I felt his pain. And after that, he ran, fled the United States, and his mother died in March of 1918. And he missed her funeral because of that. And that bothered him. And the family talked about that for years afterward. I have read many times that my Uncle Jack was abusive to his first wife. And that's why she blew her brains out, because she killed herself September the 9th, 1912. And people, I have read, oh, he beat her so badly. He dropped off at the hospital. And I've read so many times on the internet, he beat his wife. He's got a history of abuse. And this is what Eric Holder said. Eric Holder said, well, I wouldn't recommend him for a posthumous pardon because of his history of abuse against women. First of all, stop talking about something as if you were there. You weren't there when he was married to his wife. You weren't in his household. And furthermore, there are no records to support those allegations and those lies. Nobody's ever produced a hospital report, because I read that he beat her so bad and he dropped off at the hospital. There are no police reports to indicate that he was ever arrested for that. But for those of you who are intelligent enough to process those lies, let's look at it for what it really is. Now, I didn't have to have anybody tell me that he didn't beat his wife, because I knew that and I heard about him growing up as a child. But let me tell you why those lies don't make any sense for all you people that believe and say that he beat his wife. He was a black man living in Jim Crow era, a black man who was hated by everybody, especially the Caucasian race. It was already bad enough that he had money, cars, clothes, jewelry, and he openly dated white women and married them. Now, between 1908 and 1915, based on information I have, between 4,000 to 5,000 black people were lynched in the United States. You mean to tell me that Jack Johnson is beating his wife and nobody showed up and put a rope around his neck? Nobody showed up and put a bullet in his temple? Nobody showed up and beat him to death? What makes him so different from every other black man that had been hung from a tree, or every other black man that had been shot or burned out of their home by the Ku Klux Klan? Don't you know, if he had been beating his wife, number one, it would have been some evidence because he was a prize fighter. So how would she have escaped without any visible bruises to her face or body? Secondly, knowing that white people hated him, you mean to tell me you gonna let one black man, out of everybody else that you beat and hung and shot, you gonna let one black man get away with beating a white woman? Come on now. That lie was put out because he didn't give a damn about who you were or how you felt about him. He was gonna live his life, and he was not defined by what you thought of him. He was defined by what he thought of himself. But in no way did my Uncle Jack Johnson beat any woman, white or black, because he would have been dead. They sent him to prison on some trumped up charges because his wife really, Lucille Cameron, She wasn't forced to go with him. She went of her own free will. But because of the fact that they couldn't control him, that's what they did. They tried to destroy him. And they pretty much did a good job of it almost. Because when they took his boxing license and his ability to earn a living, that seriously impacted him and the rest of our family. That seriously impacted him. And it hurt him, and it hurt the rest of the family. Once he went to prison and his boxing license was taken from him and his ability to earn a living was taken from him, he had bought his mother a house at 3344 South Wabash, a very large house. But once he had to flee the country, running from the law, they were no longer able to maintain the house. And so they ended up losing the house because they didn't have the ability, financial or otherwise, to keep the house. But when you take a man's livelihood from him, when you take a man's or a person's ability to earn a living to feed their family, then that has a serious impact. And sometimes it can carry over for generations to come, because any money that he would have left us wasn't there because it was taken away from him. And he ended up having to do a lot of probably, I want to say, humiliating things, because I read that he worked in a sideshow and that he was a participant kind of like in a flea market, and he had to do things that were somewhat beneath him to earn a living, even though he still was able to pick up fights here and there, but it was nothing like what he would have been able to do had his life not been interrupted. And the impact of that, like I said, it still resonates with our family right to this day. On top of everything else that I have expressed about my uncle, I can truly say that what I heard about him as a child growing up, what I have read about him, I have simply been awestruck, truly. And I have been moved to tears just knowing that I'm related to this man. And let me tell you why I've been emotional. Because even when I was here at the beginning of the convention and I spoke, watching the video that the Suleiman family put together about my uncle, it moved me, because here is a man who was so far ahead of his time. And he was one of the most magnificent men that ever walked the face of the earth. And when I read about his courage, living when he could have been killed, and he did receive death threats, but living at a time when he did not allow anyone to treat him in an inferior manner. He did not allow that. And he carried himself with dignity and respect that was uncommon among other black people. He did not allow his race to define him. And he was like that even before he became famous. He was like that. I grew up hearing my mother always tell stories about his decisions, and my mother would always say, you know, Jack was defiant. And I would always say, you know, Mama, he's not defiant. He's just being a man. He's being himself. And there are a lot of stories out also about how he learned to fight. Well, let me just say this, because people can write whatever they want to write, but based off the information that my mother and my uncles told me, actually when he was a little boy, he was running to the house several times. He was running to the house by other little boys in the neighborhood. Now, people thinking Jack Johnson, really? Jack Johnson, somebody ran him in the house? Yes. His oldest sister, Lucy, who was, she lived until she was 92 years old. And every day she drank a shot of whiskey and she smoked a corn cob pipe. Lucy is the one that stopped him from being timid and docile. Lucy told him many times, if you don't whip them, I'm gonna whip you. And she meant that. That's where he got his courage from. It doesn't matter what you read or what somebody wrote. I'm telling you because I'm in his family. And Lucy talked about that all the time, and Jack never denied it. Lucy taught him how to fight, how to face the bullies, because he was bullied as a little boy. But back then, we didn't really use that term, but she made him go out and fight several times. And that's how he got the courage to become the Jack Johnson that he became as an adult. But he was always taught that nobody was better than him. Nobody. And so I have been you know, when I stop and think about, you know, I said, this man is my uncle. And out of all the people in the world, God gave him to my family. I mean, that just blows me away. That's priceless. That's priceless. And what's even more comforting to me is that when people would say on the internet, oh, this is my uncle, they would always say this is my uncle or this is my relative. But they never can prove it. Everybody that's saying that could never prove it. Now, I'm all over the internet, but it's not what you say, it's what you can prove. So every document that I have, birth certificates, death certificates, marriage licenses, cemetery records, I got the 1880, the 1900, the 1930 census report. The cemetery record shows that he purchased the graves for the family. His sisters are there. His mother is there. His brother's there. Every document that is available to me, I have delivered that. I have shown that. And I can prove that. So when I say that Jack Johnson is my maternal great-great-uncle, anybody that has seen my documentation knows that I am as close to Jack Johnson as you're going to get. And I say that everywhere I go because it's true. And if I have nothing else, just to be able to say that this man is my ancestor, that's priceless. I'm very, very proud of that. And I'm proud of him. And I'm even more proud that people everywhere I go, they show me so much love. They show me so much dignity, so much respect, all because of my Uncle Jack Johnson. And I would like to think that I represent him. I would like to think that he's in heaven watching me and that he's smiling. And that when I got that pardon, I know if there is a heaven and he's there, I know that makes him feel good. Because it makes me feel good. And it should have been done a long time ago. But I'm just grateful for everything. And just to be able to say that he's my uncle and to prove it, that's priceless.
May 24th of 2018 will be registered in the books of history as a great day for the sport of boxing, human equality and inclusion, as the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, signed the presidential pardon of boxer Jack Johnson at the Oval Office in the White House in Washington, D.C.
Today, as president, I've issued an executive grant of clemency, a full pardon, posthumously, to John Arthur Jack Johnson. He was known as Jack Johnson, the first African-American heavyweight champion of the world, a truly great fighter.
It was with the efforts of many people for decades to get this pardon become a reality. The WBC proudly led some of the efforts with the support of thousands of signatures of boxers and members of the boxing community.
That was, I think I was in another time zone because I had waited and waited and waited. And I had hoped that the Bush administration would do it. I had hoped that the Obama administration would do it more so than the previous administrator. And I've always been a very optimistic person. But when the Obama administration didn't do it, my heart sank. And I just about given up. And I don't give up. But my optimism was kind of like crushed. But April 21st, when Donald Trump tweeted that, as I told him, my entire life changed. The fact that he was even thinking about it, and the fact that he tweeted it. And I said, now this is amazing. And I believed that he was going to do it. I believe that. And so my hope and my optimism was resurrected. But when I got an email from the White House with my invitation, they sent me, well, no, they sent me one because I thought my daughter was going to come. But when I got the invitation, I said, I don't believe this. I'm really going. I'm really going to the White House. And then I think I got an email from the WBC, Mauricio, and everything was hush hush. They said, don't tell anybody, keep it quiet. We don't want the press to know. And I was about to bust because I knew that it was going to happen, but I had been sworn to secrecy. You don't know how that pained me because I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to tell somebody, but I couldn't. The only thing that I cared about was that piece of paper with his signature on it saying that my uncle is no longer considered a convicted felon. By this pardon being issued, that would help to rewrite history and erase the shame and the humiliation that my family felt for my uncle, a great hero, being imprisoned unjustly. And that his legacy will continue to go forward and continue to bring hope and determination, because that's how he made it, being determined and have tenacity, to have courage. And I want to represent that, and I want to carry that forward and have the foundation come to fruition so that everybody around the world that ever had a hope, ever had a dream, and inspired to make it, I want to be able to be a part of that going forward. And the WBC has been very instrumental in helping me, along with all the other people. But the WBC sent me the money, and I'm not ashamed to say this, to pay for my passport, sent me the money to buy me some dresses, and paid that astronomical airfare. Oh my God, it was so high I couldn't reach it with a sky hook to get on that plane and come all the way, not only here, but to Washington, D.C. I was in the Trump Hotel. I saw Deontay Wilder. I saw Sylvester Stallone. I saw Lennox Lewis. My daughter and I, we had an absolute blast. And the main thing that I want to say is that we were treated like royalty. And the respect and the love that's been shown to me and my family because of who my uncle was in history, that is priceless. And I appreciate that. And Mauricio, you are fantastical. Fantastical. And you too, Pepe, for recording this.